Hello adventurers and welcome back to my channel. Today I am in Wichita Falls, Texas, and we're going to the Museum of North Texas History. Now this is a cool place and it's absolutely free if you want to come out. There's a lot of cool things and we're about to dive in and see a little bit more. Let's go. Okay, we moved inside and picked up a map, and they're actually doing some renovations here, so we can come in and see a few of the rooms, but they have some special exhibits that they're working on. So when you come, there may be a couple of extra exhibits. Now this is a pretty cool place because they have all of these different galleries which have been curated to talk about not only the locals here, but some of the local businesses, some of the history, and also a few interesting things that we'll get to in just a few minutes. Now in this first gallery, we get to learn a little bit more about the firefighters and police department here in the Wichita Falls area, but they also have some very interesting facts that apply to us right at this particular time. Now it is super hot, so here they actually have hot times in the summer as the theme, and so as we're walking through here we can find out a little bit more. Let me show you. This is really cool and it's a great introduction to get us started today. On signs like these we learn about how that they deal with modern grass fires, and also what they're planning on going toward with the future as technology continues to improve. Now this is pretty interesting because grass fires are especially devastating in this particular region as a result of the extreme conditions that we receive during the summertime. And as you can see here, they also have some information about the various departments like in California that experience this particular situation as well. Did you know that they use drones to get the aerial view of a fire quickly, which is why it's important that you don't drone in areas that are experiencing wildfires. This could interfere with the actions that they're actually taking. Not to mention they have improved portable weather monitoring systems that they've installed into command vehicles, buses, and vans to monitor the weather patterns. Huh, that's cool. That's an old ice box. It says it's from the 1920s, and here we learn about staying cool, including this was actually two girls that were delivering ice, and this is how the ice used to come in order for them to have modern refrigeration at the time. So you can see it is a very different experience than we currently have now. In fact, this entire gallery right here has a variety of these different signs, and as you walk around the room you can find little facts from different portions of this area here in North Texas, from Tales and Trails, which we've actually been to before, to the Burke-Burnett Historical Society. Each of these individual signs not only is a little context that helps you dive in, but also they have QR codes. So let me show you what I'm talking about how QR codes work, and then we'll kind of look at some of these items, but maybe not dive into them, so I can leave you with a few interesting little nuggets to come and see. Okay, here is the QR code that I was mentioning a while ago, and different signs have different ones. So what you do is you take your phone and you actually put it into camera mode, you hover over, and then you click, and whenever you do, it takes you to the attached site, and whenever it connects, it tells you a little bit more information. Now, my internet's going to take just a few minutes, but here it mentions that this is how you can make your own ice cream at home only using a few simple ingredients. By the time that it's loaded, sure enough, here you go. This is a little information as to how you can make your own ice cream. There's a fun activity to do, and then also there's some more additional information through a YouTube video. I always appreciate when a museum integrates different pieces that you can actually take home with you also, because that continues the learning at home. So not only is this a fun-filled like historic area where you can get some new brain wrinkles, but also you can take those brain wrinkles and apply them to your everyday life through making ice cream. So that's really cool. I'm gonna go in and show you a few of these interesting photos and things like that, and I'll catch you on the other side of this room. I just found out about a festival that I never knew happened in my own county, the Grape Festival. That was really cool, but also they have some information about like the earliest bicycle people that were in the Burke Burnett area that were all kids. And then they have bike safety along with that. So all of the different displays kind of correlate to different things that you can apply to your everyday life even now, which is so fun. So I really like this exhibit, but we have just gotten started. There's a lot to go, and well, I'm really excited about this museum as a whole and being able to share it with you. While we're here, we picked up one of these so that we can hit a few more of these North Texas museums up in the future. We are now moving into Heritage Hall. As we move into Heritage Hall, it is a blast from the past and some of the earliest people who would have been in the Wichita Falls area. So in this area, we're going to have a lot of Western attire, a lot of really interesting things. And then up here, we have some records actually from Hank and Lefty. And this is from the collection of Ray Lunn from 1951. So really cool stuff. But this room is filled with little hidden nuggets, and as we continue moving through, you're going to see there is a very large hat collection here. But why? Believe it or not, there was a family, the Fleming family, who owned a hat company, and they retired. They'd owned this hat company since the 50s, and so whenever they did, they had a very large collection, and they wanted it to have a home in a place that they knew that it would be cherished and enjoyed, and so they donated it to this museum. And wow, there are some very interesting names on these hats. So as we kind of go through, I'm going to show you a few of these, and then of course you can come here and check out the remainder of them. One thing that I really like about this though is it tells you who the hat belonged to and then also where they were from. So you can kind of get a good idea as to where everyone kind of came from and how it correlates to this area on a map if you're familiar with this area. Like this one right here from Dale Coleman from Archer City. You can definitely see how Dale got a lot of use out of this guy. Or this one from Joe Coleman in Scotland, Texas. Definitely has some mud and muck on that one. I really like this one. That was Jim Evans's. He was from right here in Wichita Falls. The hat band itself is very fancy, and I love that there's a little feather on it. And then there's this guy. This is the Falwell hat, and the Falwell hat started the whole thing according to what this little sign says. Many years ago, 56 to be exact, Nate Fleming opened the Cow Lot, which was a Western store in Wichita Falls, Texas. About that time, Nat's brother, actually of Friona, was thought to have needed Nat to commemorate this occasion by creating a specialty hat of sorts. And this ended up being that particular hat style. So that's pretty cool. This one is separate, of course, from the others, but you can see as we look on, there are tons and tons of hats to be seen. Now, Nat specifically was considered to be a local celebrity, so it was a very big deal to go in and not only speak to Nat, but be able to interact with him. In the 50s, he was quite the name about Wichita Falls, and so that's why this collection is kind of twofold. Not only is it a really nice collection, but also you get to see this lifetime work of this person who was famed to the area. As we make it over to the other row of hats, this is actually a photo from the Texas Rangers at the Old Settler Reunion in Archer City. Frank P. Timberlake actually opened his first store in Decatur, Texas in 1898, and following the success, he ended up partnering with someone in the Wichita Falls area and opened a secondary store in 1916 on the southwest corner of 9th and Scott. Here we find Perkins, Timberlake, ladies apparel, and department store. In fact, all of the stores that you'll find along this storefront are actually stores that were right here in the Wichita Falls area at one point, which is really neat. So you get to glimpse in and see some of the inventory that they might have carried at the time, and then learn a little bit more about what life might have been like at the time that these stores were predominantly like open and going and being a resource to those in the community. So it's really neat. Oh, look at this, guys. This is the Wichita Falls Daily Times, or Wichita Daily Times. And this ended up becoming the Times Record News. And I've actually dealt with the Times Record News. They used to be my printer for my newspaper. And so this is pretty neat to be able to see some of these original, like, metal plates that they would use to print, and these are some of the larger ones, but you also have some of the smaller ones over here. Times Record News is a huge publication now, and it serves the community and a lot of other communities for that matter, because they print a lot of the local newspapers, not just here in Wichita Falls, but like for example, my newspaper was from miles and miles and miles away, and I would drive here weekly to have it printed. And so they are a large conglomerate business as a whole, but this is where they started out. Oh, Dad found something. Dad found something over here he was showing me. Dad found this. Amongst all of the cowboy hats, there is this one lone Mickey Mouse Club hat. And this is Jimmy Miller. And it says here, Barber, Texas. Interesting. Something else kind of neat in here. They have a side saddle, which of course women were considered to be unladylike if they did not ride side saddle. So here you can see how that would have worked in comparison to how a regular saddle would have worked. And they have an illustration here where what it would have looked like, but then also an illustration of what it would have looked like under all the layers of their skirt. So basically, they would have one leg that would come down like this, and one they would cross over through this area right here. So it would basically be like they're crossing their legs while riding on a saddle. That would have taken incredible balance. Of course, here's the regular saddle, which one leg would go in one stirrup on each side. Much easier to hold on that way, might I add. Now this is pretty cool because this is actually a USO mural, and apparently there are several murals that are painted as USO walls at 822 Travis Street, and they're painted by the airmen that are stationed at Air Force bases near Wichita Falls, so Shepherd Air Force Base. So that's a pretty cool thing. This was all painted by one of our local military people, so pretty neat. Of course, they have a brand wall here, and these are some of the brands that were synonymous with this particular area during various times. So they have the year and then also the brand, and then right below that they have some of the barbed wire which would have been used. Now both of these things would have been used to mark the territory that you were taking over, basically. So this would have your marking on all of your livestock so no one could claim them, and then this would be to fence off your land so no one could come and encroach upon your space. Both of these were very important, and in some areas that we've traveled to, it was noted that in order to have one, you must have both. So this is kind of interesting. Okay, so this is kind of a fun one also. This is a camera that would have originally been used to film the news and local things. And in this section, we have a KFDX TV like jumper. And then we also have this seat for Joe Brown, which was one of the local talents here in the area. And I was just talking to Dad, and he said that he actually remembers watching this guy. But I also have an interesting story about this. I actually did an internship for a day where I did a shadowing internship at KFDX. And so this is really cool. I remember going into the studio and getting to see how they produce different segments, and that was really cool. I was quite young at the time, and it was really neat. Of course, here is the United States Post Office. So here is your little window that you would talk to your postmaster, and then inside you have all of the little mailboxes and information, and then they have stamps right over here. So this is what it would have kind of looked like. Of course, the modern post offices are a little bit different than this, but actually they have very similar things also. Now this is pretty interesting because this is the first official residential area post office that was actually opened here in the Wichita Falls area, and it was opened in 1925. And so this is the mock-up of what that would have looked like that we're looking at inside the museum. So this is from that area, and so you can see what it would have been like to interact at this particular post office. But then again, you also have the historic photo so you could see what the post office looked like, which is why I love all the little details. Okay, as we move past that section, there's a lot of information in short displays. So I'm going to show you a few of those. But again, this is just scratching kind of the surface of these. And the first one that we're going to look at is on this wall right over here. This one is actually a very interesting one if you're a sports lover. Through this series of information, we learn a little bit more about the first black baseball team basically. And here you can learn more about the league, their schedules. You can see the team itself and find out a bit more. And as we go on, there are some more historic photos here, which I absolutely love. I think this is really neat that they have these here, because so frequently when we go to museums, we don't see information about this. And so this is pretty cool. These are actually photos that were used making glass plate negatives, and then they were donated to the museum here as pieces of art. So it's pretty neat to see and be able to put context into the training and everyday life of the athletes. And also that these, even though they did find and recover these, they didn't have the names of all the athletes. So it's an ongoing project. If someone comes in and recognizes a relative, they can add their information to this. And so it's a collaborative with the community. Just opposite of that, we have all of these interesting tools. This is a tool collection that is on loan from a person named Graham Wood of the Wichita Falls area. Originally, however, he is from England. And so it's pretty neat to see how he has collected and curated all of these different pieces here. In addition, for some context, they have a chart of all the different tools that are in here, and also some more information about each one of them. For example, you can find here that they have spoke halves, files, rasps, and then it tells you what kind of thing that they would do in these little descriptions. And it's a very large chart, so all you have to do is kind of find what you're interested in and then go to the corresponding case, and then you can not only see what it looks like in real life, but also the size, and also know its duty and job. Next up, there's an actual situation that is a real life situation here in Texas. We were talking about the heat earlier, but another thing that we experience a lot of are actually tornadoes. And here there's a display of Terrible Tuesday, which is the worst tornado that has actually ravaged this area, and it happened in 1979, so a little bit before I was born. But there's some photos here of just the true devastation and destruction. If you've never been in a tornado before, avoid it if you can. You never know what to expect. They're highly volatile, very scary, and well, I'll just show you the photos. You can see here that the path of the tornado itself was all of this black area, and this was said to be over a mile wide. And here you can see just the black mass of destruction that was the tornado. It left a lot of this entire area just completely barren, and the stories that came out of this were absolutely devastating. As you can see, people looking on at what used to be their homes. Here you can find a property that is completely decimated, roofs ripped off, and it just is leveled to the ground in many cases. And it just continues on from there, just proving that the true power of these destructive storms is something that, well, it's hard to explain unless you just physically see it. Within 3 communities, a lot of people actually lost their life in this particular storm, and it was considered to be one of the worst storms that they have ever experienced. So, on this particular day, April 10th, 1979, devastation came to Wichita Falls, Texas. Oh, I found Dad. Dad is in the interactive room right now, and it appears that he is using this turning person to create some very interesting things. Okay, as we move into this next exhibit room, this is Faces and Places of East Side. I really like how they have everything kind of set up where you can come into different areas of Wichita Falls and see the different faces that existed, and also some of the interesting stories. For example, right here, this is actually fascinating. From the East Side stories, we actually have one of Miss Ferris. Miss Ferris actually did something that a lot of people strive for but few can achieve. She became the first female African-American attorney in the state of Texas and was sworn in on November 12, 1953. This wall has her story as well as the Texas Bar Journal, which features one of her stories, and I think that this is really cool, but there's a few others. Let's touch on some of those. Here we learn about the Rourke's church life, and this is the Anderson Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church, so there are a lot of photos from that, but they also have the original cornerstone here in the museum, which I think is very important and also really cool. Now, in addition, because I really like to seek out new brain wrinkles, they have a couple of different historic markers that you can actually go out and find, but they have photographs of them so you can read a little bit more while here at the museum as well. So you can put all the pieces together. And so that's pretty neat. I really like that. They have touched on the schools and then the educational system. They have touched on the churches and some of the important people right here in the community. But as we move into the next room, we see something else that is just fascinating. In fact, this one I'm going to just show you a few things and then we'll talk about it. In fact, in this room we learn a little bit more about the Indians of the Plains and the indigenous people which once roamed these lands and still call to some extent these lands home today. Here we find out more about how that they would waste nothing, and in fact right here we have a list of all the things that they could use a buffalo for because they wasted nothing. In addition, there are pieces of pottery, there are arrowheads and points. You can find some interesting information about hunting patterns, and also we specifically learn about Quanah Parker here and the Wichita Indians. And I think that it is important for us to kind of highlight on that because Wichita Falls was actually named for the very people that are mentioned in this room. So very neat. Of course, after we have named the Wichita Falls community and after we've explored some of the famous faces and names, it's also important for us to look around the communities that surround it and make it great. And one of the places that continues to pop up on the list is Nocona, Texas. Now, we went over to the Tales and Trails Museum and actually learned a lot about Nocona, but one of the things that we definitely learned a lot about while we were there is the Nocona and Justin Boot companies. Now, both of these really put this area on the map and still to this day continue to be a predominant thing that people think of when they think of North Texas. And here you can find a collection of various styles, sizes, colors, and also historic photos from that particular location. And it's pretty fascinating to see some of this. As we move past that room, this display right here actually kind of puts history into perspective. On this side, you'll notice that there is someone who is staring through a window at their loved one and can't have contact. And on this one, you see the same thing, just colorized. The difference between these two, the first one was because of a polio outbreak. Polio, of course, ravaged a lot of the country. And then on this side, this was COVID-19. So very similar things coming full circle in showing us, you know, life is fragile. And as we kind of move through this section, we learn more about the polio outbreak and how so many people fell ill to this and what it meant to them. And then also the vaccine, whenever it rolled out, what that meant for people and how their quality of life changed. But we also find here an isolation chamber, which is kind of interesting. This is actually an iron lung. And so they would have the ability to reach in and to help the person, but at the same time they would be in this area. And you can see here, this is what that would have looked like. This is a bizarre medical device, but at the same time it was a very common practice. Moving into the next room, we find a variety of interesting toys, including these easy bake ovens throughout the years. And then right below that, we have a Hot Wheels display with a pretty interesting fact. It says on this little sign that is attached that automakers were surprised when the 1968 custom model Corvette Hot Wheel actually came out before the actual Corvette came out. And so it was kind of a surprise and definitely showed that they owned that brand when it came to the branding as a whole. Did you know that the Duncan yo-yo was invented in 1929 and became the original world's #1 famed, and even was inducted into the Toy Hall of Fame in 1999? Now, was it the only style toy of this kind? No. But was it the official yo-yo? Yes. And so it became super popularized, and it even went to be like coined phrase, if it is a Duncan, it isn't a yo-yo, which is kind of fun. Dad found a Viewmaster. In fact, this is one of the displays you can actually pull out and look at. This is Toy Story 2 on this one, it looks like. Let's see, what are some of these other ones? This one is Pebbles and Bam Bam. This one was also inducted into the Toy Hall of Fame in 1999, but it was originated all the way back in 1938, believe it or not. And fun fact, it was actually introduced at the World's Fair, because at the World's Fair, all of the best in technology would come out to play, and they would show you some impressive new things. Now here's another fun fact. The 1902 teddy bear was inducted in 1998. And believe it or not, in 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt refused to shoot an actual bear on an expedition. And instead, the president stated that it just wouldn't be good sportsmanship based on how that they were presenting it to him. A political cartoonist actually immortalized this by drawing the line in the Mississippi, and however, Berryman drew an old injured female bear as a cute little bear cub instead, so it'd be more appealing to the public, and it kind of stuck. They named it the teddy bear as a result of Theodore Roosevelt. Have you ever played with a slinky before? Well, here we go. The slinky unwound is 80 feet of wire steel with 98 coils, and it is approximately 2 inches tall when it's all together. Most of us will never know this, because most of us, when we play with it, it ends in a chunky little ball, which never is fully extended. But that's some fun facts. I don't know that I've ever seen these particular potato people before. This is super funny. Mr. Potato Head Funny Face Kit. Did you know he had a body? I never knew he had a body, but he also had friends. There's Katie the Carrot in the back, and Pete the Pepper, and Frenchie the Fry is somewhere in here. Here he is right over here. This is so funny. Now, I more knew this Mr. Potato Head right here. He only had feet. I am wondering what happened to his body. Now, Dad just brought to my attention something very interesting about the one that has the body. Originally, that was marketed as you would add your own piece of fruit or your own potato, and so you would put the body and all of that on there, and so the body was sold instead of the potato. But then they started selling the potato, the plastic potato, and that's when it all changed. That is interesting. I never knew that. You never know what you're going to learn when you come to a museum. Now, what made the shift happen? Well, according to this, that during the Depression and the wartime, they were doing food rationing, and so toy companies felt that it would not be okay to waste the food. So instead, they started creating the more interesting little Mr. Potato Head that we know today. I'm still not sure why the body didn't make the cut, but it's super fun to know that this is kind of the evolution of the Mr. Potato Head. Other interesting things in this room, the pet rock. That's right, the pet rock. And also, they have Beanie Babies, because of course they have Beanie Babies. Those were a huge piece of iconic toy history. So that's pretty neat, but now we're off to our next room. And our next rooms are going to be a series of different military history rooms. Now, of course, Shepherd Air Force Base is right outside of Wichita Falls, and we're not super far away from Lawton, which is also a large base. So I think that it's very interesting to see what all that they have here. They have a rich history in this area, and so there's a lot of contributing factors to this particular display, so I'm really excited to share a few of the pieces. In this particular section, you have models of all of the different tanks, and they have all of the tanks kind of lined up in these cases with their name, what country they were from, and then also who built the individual model. And I think that this is awesome because it gives you a perspective of each of these in a scale that is more favorable to museums that are smaller like these. Of course, I've been to the Military Vehicle Museum, and that was, wow, the largest collection of military vehicles that I've seen at a non-government owned museum. That was amazing. And so having the correlation between these and then also those, massive amount of brain wrinkles, guys. It really does pay to go from one museum to the next and put together all of the pieces. But as we're going along, they don't just have models here. They have a lot of like local information. And so let's meet a few heroes. Like this guy right here. This is actually a Silver Star Award winner, Captain Robert M. Fowler Jr. He was a U.S. Army service member from 1942 to 1955, and he was also awarded a Bronze Star in Belgium. And here you can find some of his citations, and then right next to that we have some information about World War II and Pearl Harbor specifically. And as we kind of move from there, you can see some of the original Life collector's editions, the National Geographics, and some of the photos that were actually from that day. We also have some correspondence, and then also some of the group that actually was responsible for the Hiroshima atomic bomb. Here you have photos of them, and also a few of the other more updated photos of some of that same crew from the Enola Gay. In addition, you can find photos that are historic of the actual explosions that were happening around Pearl Harbor, including the USS Utah, and then right behind that you have the USS California. And if you've ever wanted to get an idea as to what these ships looked like, this actually is the ship room, which shows you model recreations of each of these ships. And the documentation on each of them is quite fascinating. For example, right here we have the USS Phoenix, and as you can see, it is clearly taken fire there. But this is what it would have looked like before that fire happened. Now, as we move out into this hall, there are so many photos lining both walls of the different units, the squadrons, some more of the interesting photos from the ships themselves, and then they also have some maps like these and some artwork. But then one of the things that I noticed right here was the Brotherhood of Carpenters, and it's the roll of honor for the local union. They also have a few individuals where they have the actual news stories which accompany their service. And so these are very nice also because it shows you who these people were and what exactly that they had done. And so that is a really nice touch for a local museum. But then we move into the Vietnam War experience, and here we have, of course, uniforms, we have photos, and then we have a few other pieces that I want to touch on. So what might an average soldier have had in his meal combat kit? Well, this is what his MRE might have looked like. There was an accessory pack that might have had cigarettes, matches, chewing gum, toilet paper, coffee, instant cream, and then some kind of non-dairy item, and then a sugar and a salt. This is what all of that would have looked like though. And you can see here they have a little can opener, and these are actually things that you can still use today that you can get at camping supply stores. But then their food itself might have been one canned meat, one canned fruit or cake, and then maybe some kind of cracker, a cocoa beverage or candy, a spread of some kind, such as a peanut butter, a jam, or a cheese, and then of course the accessory pack. There are some really interesting stories about how the food tasted during this particular wartime. So it's no question that this was not the most pleasant of situations due to the humidity, the location, the constant worry, but also the food. There was not a lot of comfort going on in any capacity during the Vietnam War. And so as we kind of move around here, we're going to see a few more items, as well as some of the things that were happening here on the home front. Of course, a lot of people protested the Vietnam War, including veterans who had returned from the war. And here you can see a few of the historic photos of those protests. In fact, still to this day, the Vietnam War is said to be one of the worst in way of how it ended up affecting soldiers who were returning in way of mental health and then all long-term PTSD. The things that they saw there were not good, and a lot of people still struggle with that. So it's very important to come to places like this to kind of get a better idea as to what the conditions were and also the things that they were doing. And so as we move around, you can see some of the artifacts, such as being able to call up the guy that's on the other end making the big calls, and what that would have been like. The radio guy would have had to cart it around a pack like this, which was very heavy, and he would have been responsible for having that correspondence back to the base to find out out what they were supposed to do next. You can also see some of the items, such as the pieces that they would have carried with them with their canteens, their hats, their uniforms. And that's just scratching the surface, of course. The human impact can also be seen over here. These were real people that they were interacting with, and a lot of them were children. And so as we're seeing some of the interactions that were super positive, there were just as many, if not more so, negative impact kind of stories like these. And there are photos that document this throughout time. This is one of the longest wars, and so the amount of people who were involved, all the moving parts of this, the feet on the ground, it was extremely impactful to an entire section of Americans at the time. Not only were sons going off, but daughters were affected. They lost their husbands or their boyfriends. Many of them did not want to go to war. Many of them wanted to just live their lives and go on and go about with their college or have their job, and that did not happen. And so there were a lot of things that happened during this time, and as a result also of the changing climate of war, a lot of these people returned injured and still to this day are having to cope with those kinds of things. So this is just a small look at the Vietnam War, but inside you can find even more information as you browse about. Now inside this next room we talk about the women of the military, and we have a series of books and also information that get us started. In fact, inside this room you can see the variations of the women's uniforms throughout time. And these are very interesting because of course they have their dress uniforms and then their actual combat uniforms kind of displayed in here as well. But then you also can see the variety of different kinds of hats that women would have worn as opposed to their male counterparts. And then some of the photos of people actually at work doing their job. And of course, all of these photos are also donated so that we can have this as a reference for finding out a little bit more about our military history. And of course, this is one of the things I really love about coming to local museums, is you can see the faces of those in the community who actually are a part of the history that we're learning about. These are all women who have served and now call Wichita Falls home. And these are just some of the women who proudly live in the Wichita Falls area and continue to promote positivity amongst the community in regards to their service and their time. And they share their stories with us today here at the museum. Now, interesting fact about women in the military, for the longest time, they weren't allowed to be in the military. They could be nurses and they could be helpful in way of training exercises, but they didn't get formal recognition in a lot of these particular areas until much longer after they'd been serving in those positions. For example, the WASPs. The WASP actually flew test missions when it came to what they were going to do in World War II here in the United States. They would do things that were crazy in the planes, and yet they were not even given government benefits or anything for their time with creating these training strategies which would help people abroad. It was wild to find that out. But after a certain amount of time had passed, people started realizing, hey, wait, no, these women were exceptional. And so finally, the right people got to push in, and they finally got their commendation for their service and their work, which I think is great. But that's usually the case with women in the service. It usually takes the squeaky wheel just squeaking a little too long before finally somebody is willing to say, hey, they're doing the same thing that the men are. Let's take care of them too. Okay, as we move into room 5, this is the World War I and World War II room, and this is a very long room, and as you can see back here, there's actually a patch wall, which we'll get to in just a moment, but kind of similar to the women, you have all of the different kinds of styles of hats and combat gear that they would have worn, in addition to their dress and combat uniforms throughout. This entire display is filled with unique money from different countries. This is quite fascinating. And this is actually a turning display where they've used a case so that you can better see some of the items inside. These include the pins, some of the matchboxes. They also have some of the commendations, dog tags, IDs, all sorts of interesting things. This is an interesting photo right here. It says troops wear gas masks to protect against the gas attacks. By the end of World War I, 63 different gases had been developed. These shoulder patches are all from World War I and World War II, and they've been donated by Roy Rutherford. This really gives you a perspective of all of the different patches that they had that could have been worn. Inside this display room, we are now moving into the Iwo Jima section. And again, more models of things that might have been used at the time. And this is actually a Japanese marine outboard motor that they have on display from that time as well. Now, around the room, there are a lot of photos in this particular room where you can see those who have served in Iwo Jima. And behind us, you might notice this small instrument. And here we learn the story of taps. Now, taps did not begin in Iwo Jima. Let's just start there. Taps actually began long before all of this, and it has kind of an interesting story that dates back to 1862. Now, according to what we've just learned here at the museum, taps actually began as a part of the Confederate versus Union soldiers conflict here in the United States. And what happened was a father had seen and heard something from kind of out in the middle of the battlefield, but it was nighttime, and he risked his life to go and save this person because he thought, well, they're close enough, I might be able to save them. He pulled them back only to discover that they had passed in the attempt to do this. Now, I mentioned he was a father. When he looked down, he saw that this was in fact his son. His son had enlisted for the Confederates as a result of being in the South for his education. And at the time, he saw this and was devastated because not only did he not know his son was serving, but he definitely did not know that he would be serving for the Confederacy. And he was sad. He wanted to honor his son in a way, but at the same time, they would not allow him to have the full regalia of the band. Instead, they told him he could have one instrument, and he chose the bugle, and the bugle was given a series of notes that were found in his son's pockets, and that was the taps that we know today. So that's the story of taps as told by the museum, and I think that that's a really sad story, and I never knew the meaning behind that, and so it's even more sad when you hear it now to know that that was a father saying farewell to his son that he didn't know was even combating against him. It was a really tragic thing to have the North versus the South, and a lot of people don't realize that in that particular conflict there were brothers against brothers and fathers against sons. Now inside here they give a description as to what happened in the Battle of Iwo Jima, and then there's a lot of photos as well. So the goal was to capture this mound right here. And from the time that they landed until the time that they actually took this location, it was several days. 30,000 men came ashore just for this one engagement, and an additional 40,000 followed through after that. They started on February 19th, and they finally made it to the top by February 23rd to erect the flag on the top. Now, this particular flag raise was not just any flag raise, though. This is the one that has become synonymous and engraved upon all of us. And there's a very interesting story behind the men in this particular flag raising that is absolutely compelling to know as well. See, these guys were all from different backgrounds, and they barely knew each other in this moment of what we call to be one of the greatest days in American history, and iconically known even to this day by the pictures that we have seen. But one of the things that we don't know is that they were brothers on that day. They didn't have racial barriers, they didn't have religious barriers, they were just men who were doing their job together. And in addition to that, these brave men didn't all make it after this photo was taken. In fact, it was kind of the opposite, but they stood together in this moment of solidarity, and there's a great display that explains a little bit more of this in a museum in Fredericksburg, the Museum of the Pacific War. I think that you guys should definitely go there because it's a huge military museum that tells a lot of great stories, but I remember this one, it embedded in my brain because the people came from such varying backgrounds and converged on this one iconic moment despite being different races and different religions and having different beliefs. And I thought that that was really cool. Now there is a little bit of sand here from Iwo Jima, and you can see here that it's from 1992. And there is another one right here from the commanding officer. And you can see it's encased in this small case right here. Moving past the military, we come into the CCC, which is the Civilians Conservation Corps. Now, if you have been to a state park or a national park, you've probably seen something that these guys have touched. They had different groups of these kind of scattered throughout the United States. During the 1930s, during the Depression, it was really hard to find a good paying job, and the CCC would allow people to get a decent paying job in order to get some improvement projects done kind of around the country. And so they did a lot of stonemasonry. And so you can see that reflected again at state and national parks all over. And the work that they did wasn't just like a fly-by-night, ooh, we're just going to get this done quickly. They actually did quality work that still remains even to this day, almost 100 years later. So I think that that's just really fascinating. But this gave jobs to people, and it helped them to pull themselves up and out of the depressive times that were going on with the economic downturn. And so I think that this is a really neat thing. And so you can find some photos of the CCC in this region, but also a couple of other artifacts. Now, as we're about to wrap up the museum, there's something kind of interesting as you go down this hallway back toward the front. There's a timeline, and this timeline takes you through all of history of this region and kind of tells you some of the most interesting things that have happened, including in 1982, the inaugural Hotter Than Hell 100 bike race actually began right here in Wichita Falls. And this is a neat bike ride. This is one that happens that is not for the faint of heart. Now, neat meaning crazy, because it is super hot here in Texas during the summer and people are out there riding their bikes. At the same time, it's really cool to know that they're taking this thing and making an extreme challenge. And so for those who are a thrill seeker, this is a good one. Now, in the original one, it says here that there were between 10,000 and 14,000 people who showed up to that inaugural event. And it's a huge event every single year that they still do to this day. So if you're interested and you're bordering on a little bit of that crazy extremist and you want to try something a little wild, that might be up your alley. But there's other things on here also, including the racial integration in 1969 of the schools. And then as you kind of go down a little further, the aid and prevention of a communist takeover of South Vietnam in the United States begins by supporting President Kennedy right here. And then it just keeps going on and on. They also have some of these historic photos of some of the first structures that were in the Wichita Falls area, and you can see some of the most beautiful architecture, such as this one, which had a gingerbread trim to it, and then also this one, which is a dining room and drawing room that was actually in the Iowa Park area. They even have some photos like this, which is the 1932 Golden Jubilee. It was a 3-day event, and you can see this was one of 3 parades that they had, and this is what the parade vehicles would have looked like of the time. Now, they still have horses, and they even have some carriages in the parades, especially the old pioneer days and the old settlers days. But a few of these other things you probably wouldn't see now as much. Okay, guys, that's gonna wrap it up for us here at the museum. I picked up some more things for some future Texas adventures, and I can't wait to share them with you. I've really enjoyed sharing these brain wrinkles with you. Remember, local museums can be super cool because they give you an idea of the people around you and the interesting things that you can find. You can find local museums across the country, and a lot of them have a fount of information and knowledge that'll make you start looking at your community a little different. Remember, guys, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time, and today has definitely been that. Till next time, guys, bye!